Hey guys, how you doing? Dog Vinyl again. Had a week off. Today we're gonna do David Bowie, and I'm playing one of his very early hits, "Man Who Sold the World." Great musician. So, we're gonna do it in two parts. Today's gonna be part one, and we'll talk a little about that. So let's turn this down and talk a little about what we're going to be doing today. Okay, so today's David Bowie. Before I start, I'd like to talk a little bit about subscribers. Of course, there's going to be a big disc set coming out on David Bowie on vinyl and CD, various things. Anniversary of his death. He passed in 2016, which was really sad, of liver cancer. So we're going to talk a little bit about David Bowie, his background. Got little notes here for some influence, all kinds of cool stuff. So let's start. David Bowie was born David Robert Jones in 1947. So he's Davy Jones, actually, believe it or not. He has a name change, which we'll talk about a little bit later into his career. So before I get into David Bowie, I hope to see a lot of you guys with some questions and stuff. Since this is a bigger artist, we're going to get into some bigger artists, Paul McCartney, things like that, Steve Winwood, so we can talk about the cross-pollination, the aspects of music influences and what have you. And this is a big one. This is kind of a big one, what I like to call separate channels. Like I did Traffic before, and then I'll be doing Steve Winwood. So again, like a two-part show, and this is the same thing. So back to David Bowie. Interesting start, a career. He grew up with various psychiatric problems, but he overcame them, which is really good. He was influenced by jazz, blues, early rock, and he played the saxophone for a while, played a little guitar, was multi-instrumentalist. I wouldn't say he was an amazing instrumentalist, but he had a good working knowledge of music and had a very unique voice. So one of the things that we're going to look at David Bowie as his discography of his studio albums from the beginning. I'm missing one album, a disclaimer here. I don't have a copy of Larger, which is part of the Berlin trilogy, which he did with Brian Eno and Robert Fripp, which I'll talk about because I have the other two albums, Low and Heroes. We're going to go from his first solo album all the way to the album Never Let Me Down, which is really the end of the first era, because there's a box set that comes out that John has down at the store that is from 1992, 93 to later on in his career. So that'll be the second part. And I'll be covering that with the box set and some of the newer albums later. His music dramatically changed and shifted. David Bowie's a very interesting person. There's a lot of aspects of his music that was cross-pollinating at the time with bands like the Velvet Underground, which he did one of his covers in a band called The Buzz. He was in also another band called Riot Squad, and he was in the King Bees for a little bit, which a lot of players had played with. Of course, he changed his name in 1966 to David Bowie, rather than David Robert Jones, not to get mixed up with David Jones or Davy Jones from the Monkees, obviously. And that was very big in the 1960s, so they could see the reason for that. One of the cool things that really we see is the integration of different styles of music that David Bowie did. He started out with some blues and rock and then went into some stuff. He also really was the introducer of the glam rock movement, various other aspects of music. He even introduced some progressive elements. Rick Wakeman is on one of his albums. So he was really a very experimental artist. He had an amazing voice. The voice textures of his voice had an amazing range. David Bowie had a very distinct voice. Once you heard it, you knew who it was. And his music ever changed. It was always evolving and changing, and it really was cool. So let's start off with David Bowie's first album, 1967, self-titled David Bowie. Great album. This is a brand new 180 gram copy over at Max J. It's recorded on Durham. And this has a lot of blues covers on Uncle Arthur, Still in the Code, Rubber Band, Love You Till Tuesday, There's a Happy Land, Where Hungry Men, When I Leave My Dream. A lot of these are Bowie-stylist, Bowie-esque music. Really, really cool stuff, as you can see there from Bowie's, young he is. He's like a kid. Again, he's 20 years old when this album came out because he was born in 1947. It did really well. It didn't do that well, I'm sorry. It didn't do, it put him on the map. It was interesting. But it was his second album that came out. And this album has a lot of different aspects to it because in this country it's called Space Oddity. This came out in 1969. It's a different cover in England. And this album really put him on with the song, obviously, Major Tom, which is Space Oddity. And as you can see, this is the whole glam rock scene that he started coming up in before he created the Ziggy Stardust character, which we'll talk about in a minute. This has Space Oddity, which of course was really amazing. Rick Wakeman does the keyboards on this and the Mellotron work, which gives it an ethereal, very cool, atmospheric feel to it. An amazing song, and really one of the first big songs. When it first came out, it was big in Europe, but it didn't take off here in America until it was re-released in 1972 on this album right here. But this is not the original 1969 release. The album was a different cover, different style, especially the UK one, and again, it was released later in the United States. Now, for other songs on this has Unwashed and Somewhere Slightly Dazed, Letter to Hermines, Sixth Committee, which is kind of weird, Janine, which is on side 2, An Occasional Dream, The Wild-Eyed Boy from Freaktown, Free Cloud, which is cool. God Knows I'm Good, which is kind of cool. And Memory of a Freud thing. Again, very experimental, very cool. The album didn't do well here, did well in England, and then it took off later, like I said, in the United States with the re-release of this in 1972. His next album to come out was one of the first albums that really put him on the map, and that's the map when I started with. And this one, of course, is The Man Who Sold the Earth. This is the American copy. The original copy is a cartoon, which I do have a copy of it. I loaned it to a friend. They have it. It's a cartoon scene of it, and that was the original UK version, and the US version, they did a copy of it. But this is the first pressing for the US version, which I believe came out in 1972, but the album originally came out in 1971. This came out with a real cool poster, which I'll show you, which I believe it still has. So it's kind of cool. As you can see, I have the original poster, which of course having the original poster makes it obviously worth all that much more money. And that of course has the amazing David Bowie and that kind of transgender movement way before it became cool today. And of course the bisexuality of David Bowie, which I'm not going to really discuss too much about because it's more of a, personal element and not a musical element. But yes, this was a very big album. This had 2 big songs on it. One is The Man Who Sold the World, which you were just listening to. And the second song, of course, was The Superman, which is really, really cool. Side 1 is The Width of a Circle, which is another really cool song. All the Mad Men, Black Country Rock, and After All. And of course, he plays guitar, plays 12-string guitar on that, as you can see right there. Very cool, one of my favorite Bowie albums, to tell you the truth. This really got the David Bowie sound. Really put it forward. And from here on out, you're going to see each album has certain hits that everyone's familiar with. These first 3 albums are really good, and they create the David Bowie sound, but then we have this whole gender-neutral thing that we're going to see right here, and he goes with the album in 1972, I think this was, yep, and this is Hunky Dory. And of course on the map, of course people are back then like, oh, is he a man, is he a girl, whatever, they couldn't deal with it. Who cares? The music's awesome. This starts out with side 1 with Changes. Changes, a great song. Oh, They're Pretty Thing. 8-line poem, Life on Mars. Kooks in Quicksand. Side 2 is Fill Your Heart. Andy Warhol, Song Tour Bob Dylan, Queen Bitch, and the Belay Brothers. A really good, produced by Ken Scott, mixed at Trident Studios. This is a really, really cool album. This, What Changes, was a real big hit. Now David Bowie was on the map. He's starting to get some recognition across the pond, both the United States and Great Britain. Very, very cool album. Hunky Dory is really cool. And then it leads to his next album and his next persona, the Ziggy Stardust era, which I call the next era of David Bowie. And his album, of course, was called David Bowie, The Spiders of Mars, and Ziggy Stardust, and Ziggy Stardust with The Spiders from Mars. This was a really, really big album. This is one of the first big selling albums in the United States. This has a lot of big hits on it, as you can see. This has 5 Years, Soul Love, and then Moon Age Daydream, which of course was made famous in the 2015 movie Guardians of the Galaxy. Starman, which is really good, another great hit. Side 2 is Lady Stardust, Hang On To Yourself, Ziggy Stardust, another great hit. Suffragette City, another big hit, and Rock and Roll Suicide. Again, this plays up on the whole David Bowie element of, his concepts of what he was doing at the time in his band, and the 2 musicians that he was playing with at the time are really, really good and interesting. This time he had Mick Ronson, Mickey Woodsman's and Trevor Holden. I believe Andy Dunbar played in, not on this album, but another album of his. So yeah, he had different musicians. You can see that he was really more about the imagery of what David Bowie's all about. He really started to develop his style, and this album really was a big smash, one of the big hits. And then from here on out, we're going to see each album really building on the sound and the sound landscape that David Bowie was building in the band and his whole solo career. His next album came out was, of course, Aladdin Sane. And this album came out, let me get my glasses here. Oh, they're right up here. so I can get the little bit more accurate information for you guys. This album comes out, because these are all originals, most of these originals. This album comes out in 1974, and this has a lot of really good hits on it too. This has Watch That Man, Aladdin Sane, Driving Saturday, Panic in Detroit, Cracked Head on In Time, The Prettiest Star, Gloucester Road, Let's Spend the Night Together, which of course is a Rolling Stones cover. The Jean Genie, great song. Detroit, New York, and Lady Gritting Souls. So very, very cool album, released on RCA United States and the Orange Dexicode. Again, playing up on that whole sexual ambiguity of what he was. Was he a homosexual? Was he a heterosexual? Was he bisexual? Was he a man? Was he a woman? And of course it played into the whole element of the early 70s, the whole free movement and what have you. And to me, I thought it was kind of cool as part of his persona, but it really came through in his music, and his music was just amazing, very different, textured and layered, amazing music. Then he did another album called Pinups, which is exclusively covers, and it has some really cool covers on it. This has the Pink Floyd early cover with Syd Barrett called See Emily Play on it, and it has other covers too, which I'll say. It's got Rosalind, Here Comes the Night, which of course that's by Van Morrison. I Wish You Would, See Emily Play, which I'd already mentioned. Everything All Right, I Can't Explain, which of course is a Who cover. Side 2 is Friday on My Mind. We all know that sound. Do, 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 do. Shape of Things, Where Have You All Gone, The Good Times Gone. And very, very cool. Again, playing up on the whole element of where David Bowie's going, the Ziggy Stardust persona. Really cool. We have a male and female on the cover, and you can't really see the ambiguity of the difference between the sexes. Very much a gender pioneer when it came to stuff like that, and I thought it was kind of cool, very interesting. Again, cool stuff. And then this is the remastered heavyweight 180 gram vinyl as I got over at Bob John's. Now the next one that comes out is of course the Diamond Dogs, which was 1975. Great album. This has a lot of good hits on it. Again, going with the same sound pattern and kind of cool stuff. This one has Future Legend, Diamond Dogs, Sweet Thing, Candidate, Sweet Thing Part 2, Rebel, 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 Rock and Roll, We Are the Dead, 1994, Big Brother, Enchanter, The Ever Circling. And this has Ainsley Dunbar on drums, Herbie Flowers on bass, Mike Garson, Tony Newman, which of course a great jazz drummer too, was on this too. Really cool stuff. You're starting to see his integration of different jazz, rock, fusion, all sorts of musicians that play on David Bowie's albums. Very cool. Very, very cool indeed. His next album comes out. He goes for more of a traditional male look on this one on the cover, called Young Americans. Very cool. A little side note, George Underwood was one of his early close friends before all this started, and I guess they had a fight over a girl, punched him in the eye and caused some issue where he couldn't see, but they became good friends, and he was kind of in charge of a lot of David Bowie's albums, the cover art. So that's kind of really magnanimous of the kind of guy David Bowie was. He had a serious injury to his eye by this guy because of over a girl or whatever, and he forgave him, and they became friends. So that's just really cool. Just goes to show the character. David Bowie, first pressing on grade. This one, of course, has all the big classics. Again, this has Andy Newman and Dennis Davis on Newmark. This has songs on this one are really Young Americans, which is Good Win, Fascination, Right, Somebody's Up There Like Me, Across the Universe, a great song, by the way. Can You Hear Me? Fame is on this, too. Sigma Sound, and Electric Lady. Very, very cool stuff. Again, David Bowie was a real staple by the mid-70s. His music was considered alternative to some degree, but really cool. His sound changed and his look changed. This is a little bit away from the Ziggy Stardust look. And then we get into the next album, Station to Station, which is, this is right before the, what we call the Berlin Trilogy, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. This album's really cool. This has Station to Station, Golden Years, Words Yarning, TBC 15, Stay, and Wild as the Wind. Again, going for another different look here with Mr. David Bowie. Again, going back to the look that you just saw in Young Americans. Very cool stuff. Very cool music. Again, each one of these albums yielded at least one, if not two hits. So he was always in the top 40, in the top 100. He was always in the spotlight, always was in part of the rock and roll music scene. Now the next three albums, which I don't have Lodger, but I have these two. I have Low and I have Heroes. Lodger is the third of the trilogy. And these are great albums because these have the Brian Eno and Robert Fripp influence, which is really good. Brian Eno from, of course, Roxy Music, who I did before. He was on their first two albums. And Robert Fripp, which, of course, is the founder of King Crimson. Now you're starting to see all kinds of musical landscape. This music and these two albums yielded some decent hits, especially on this album. But the music is layered, textured, progressive style, very, very aggressive. very kind of almost very deceptively simple, but not if you break it down. Lots of time signature changes, lots of tonality changes. His voice really plays it well. So the first album is Low. Low has a lot of really cool stuff on it. Again, with the band in Low was really, really cool. I have it right here as I look through it. I mean, we're looking at, you're looking at, Robert Fripp, Brian Eno. Eno did some vocal background on this. Iggy Pop is on this album. And again, of course, I already mentioned Robert Fripp. All sorts of really cool musicians on this. Lots of guest stars. And this, of course, leads to his cross-pollination work with Freddie Mercury when they did Under Pressure, which was a great album and a great song. That was, of course, on a Queen album. But David Bowie did a duet, probably one of the greatest duets in rock and roll, I think, personally, is this is an amazing, amazing song. His other album, Larger, which I don't have, cool album. And then I have Heroes. This is really, really cool. And Heroes has all kinds of cool stuff on it. This has Beauty and the Beast, Joe the Lion, and Heroes, which of course was a theme for the song. He did that with Brian Eno. Songs That Are Silent, Blackout. Side 2 is V2 Schneider, Sense of Doubt, Moss Garden, Nukolon, and The Secret Life of Arabia. This has David Bowie, Carlos Alomar, great rhythmic guitarist, by the way, Dennis Davis, George Murray, Brian Eno, and Robert Fripp on lead guitar. Again, just an amazing album, yielding some great hits. His look and his sound changing again one more time with the Berlin Trilogy. Now going on to later stuff, he does another change. This is called Scary Monsters. This comes out, I believe, in 1984. No, 1980. I'm sorry, 1980. And this has some cool stuff on it. It's No Game, Up the Hill Backwards, Scary Monsters, Ashes to Ashes, and Fashion are on this. 2 big hits. Teenage Wildlife, Scream Like a Baby, Kingdom Come, Because You're Young, and It's No Game Part 2. Very, very cool. Great album cover, by the way. If you don't, if you want to see that right there, that's a really amazing album cover. Scary Monsters, yielding some great hits, and David Bowie becoming a really staple in the rock and roll scene, influencing glam rock, influencing punk, influencing so many people. David Bowie really being a trailblazer in sound, appearance, and everything about rock and roll. His next album comes out called Let's Dance. And of course, that has the song on it, Let's Dance. Very, very good album. The U.S. repress back in the 80s. This album, I believe, comes out in 1982, is it? I'm pretty sure. I think it's 82. God, they make the date so small on these things, you can never remember. I think it's 82. Don't quote me on that, though, exactly. Okay, another thing, too, is they have to pull it out because they decided not to put the track listing on the album. So you got to go inside, grab this beautiful little inner sleeve, and give you the track listing, which of course this has got China Girl, which was a hit, Cat People, which I always loved, Ricochet, Without You. The other side, he's got Shake It, Modern Love, another great hit, then of course been used in many movies, and then Let's Dance was another hit. Again, this album created quite a few hits, and let's find out the date. Maybe the date's in here, and the date is, we have Kaman Edis, Omar Hakim on drums, a great drummer, by the way, from jazz. Tony Thompson, Nile Rodgers on guitar, lead guitar, and Stevie Ray Vaughan's on this album. How cool is that? Rob Sabino, various trumpets, and if you look at who plays on David Bowie's albums, it's always amazing to see who pops up and who's playing with who. I believe this album is 1982, but don't quote me on that. I think so. Are they going to tell us? Nope, it's a Masha Brady secret. They're not going to tell us. This is on Parlophone, but again, I think it's 1982. I'd have to look it up online. I didn't put it in my notes. I probably should have. Dating is not so important as long as you get the general era. This is an 80s album, I can tell you that, because it came out with Scary Monsters. Then the next album that comes out is David Bowie. This one right here is really cool. This was, this is Tonight. This is an original first pressing, again, on EMI, Parlophone. And this has some pretty cool hits on it, too. This was released in 1984, so that must have been 1983, 1982, 83, I was about right. This one has Loving the Alien, Don't Look Down, God Only Knows, Tonight, Neighbor Threat, Blue Jean, I love that song, Tumble and Twirl, I Keep Forgetting, and Dancing with the Big Boys, another really good song. This is produced by Hugh Padgham, who's also at this time producing Genesis, which is really cool. So again, another great album, and this is really towards the tail end of his 80s sound, because his last album in the 80s studio album, I should say, was Never Let Me Down. This one right here. And this has a lot of cool stuff on it, too. This has Never Let Me Down, Day In and Day Out, Time Will Crawl, Beat of Your Drum, Shining Star, 87, and Cry, and Bang Bang. This, again, goes for a different sound, different look. Again, Mr. David Bowie changing his appearance, changing his sound, changing everything he's got. Very, very cool stuff. So one of the things I really liked about David Bowie, to get back to it, is his career spans such a massive change in music. Another band that's similar is U2. When I do them, I'll talk a little bit about them, how they started out a certain sound and changed it, and each album was have a different sound. David Bowie's the same way. Very cool. His sound landscape, his textured music, really cool. I always love the fact that he used some really, really good musicians. He's always played with some really excellent musicians. His duet with Freddie Mercury, with Under Pressure. His influence is immeasurable. If you look at the influence of today's musicians and even the 80s and 90s musicians, a lot of them are influenced by David Bowie's style, his sound, his use of sound landscape, and his use of lyrical use too, in the way he sang and the way he changed things around. He was really more of a sound theater kind of thing. He was a whole package. David Bowie was about the sound, but he's also about the imagery that he produced while he played live. I never got to see David Bowie live, and that's one of my true regrets, because I've always loved David Bowie. Just always thought, oh, he'll always be around. He comes on. Of course, in the past 10 years before he died, his concerts were getting expensive. I wish I went to go see him when I was in my heyday in the late 80s, early 90s, when concerts were cheap. I could have saw him for like $30. The last couple times he played, it was multiple hundreds, and of course, that's the deal. What we're dealing with today, what we call legacy rock bands. He died in 2016. Of course, the world is a much sadder place without him in it, because he just did some amazing stuff. And every time I'm in a certain mood, I like to put on David Bowie. His music's great. It's kind of like the Moody Blues. You got to listen to the whole album and get the whole thing, because he always had something going on in that album. It was always a great sound. I hope you like part 1 of David Bowie. Like I said, these are the David Bowie years from the beginning. I'm going to do part 2 in the future. That's not right yet. I'm going to try to compose that and talk about towards the tail end of his career and how his sound changed, and do some more listening and some more research to get a kind of a better quality show for you about David Bowie's career. I have a couple other bands coming up in the next couple of weeks. I got Genesis, Steve Winwood, Alan Parsons Project, a bunch of different bands, and I'm going to do some studio things. I'm going to do some genre shows, like The Birth of Punk, early hard rock, things like that. So we're going to do some kind of fun stuff. I'd really like to see some subscribers kick in. I'd like to see some people get involved in some comments. Anytime you make a comment, I really go out of my way to try to answer questions or to make comments on your comments. So it'd be really cool to get some dialogue going so we can talk about some of these bands and music, which we all know and love. Well, that's it for today. For David Bowie, I'll see you guys soon. Doc Vinyl out.